We'll preview the Big Ten Bowl season, and we'll gaze into the crystal ball to see what 2018 could look like for the University of Michigan's sports teams. Next on Michigan Podcast.
There's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deeper into the front. Waits for it. It's caught.
This is no time for that. In the pocket and a sack. Tim Jamison. Brady gets terrific. Throws it and touchdown Knight again. Schultz just before Brazil got him. And a leaping interception by Woodson.
Harbaugh back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris hacks a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Second. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again. Michigan.
Go Blue, and welcome to our year-end edition of Michigan Podcast. After this, we're off for a little Christmas break, and we will return. Those of you that have been asking, hey, are you guys going to keep this going year-round? We're going to do our best to do exactly that. We'll probably take a little hiatus in the spring. But other than that, we're going to be here every week again after this, starting on January 9th. We have a lot to get to here today. Want to thank all of you for watching us here on YouTube. If you like what we do, please subscribe to our channel, click like. Help us to share what we're doing here by helping us spread the word. You can do the same by subscribing on iTunes, to our friends and partners at Detroit Sports Podcast as well, who help us to get the word out about what we're doing here each week at Michigan Podcast. We thank you too. And don't forget, if you're jonesing for our take on things, like, three of you, you can follow us on Twitter at Michigan Podcast, on Twitter. And I'm going to be there even throughout vacation, breaking down basketball games, breaking down bowl practices, the recruiting classes, etc. at Michigan Podcast on Twitter. Welcome you again to this week's episode. I'm Steve Deace. Later on, we're going to get to what I think could very well be the top 10 sports stories coming up in 2018 for the Maize and Blue. But we're going to begin with Big Ten bowl season getting started here very shortly. And I think this is a big bowl season for the league. Now, I will tell you, the dumbest debate, in my opinion, the dumbest debate in sports is my conference can beat up your conference. I just think it's a stupid debate. And it has nothing to do with the fact I'm not a fan of a school in the SEC. I love watching SEC football. I probably watch more SEC football than even Big Ten football because on television, the presentation of SEC football is second to none. I'm not going to hate. I'll recognize. Hate the game, not the player, as we used to say in my suburban hood back in the day. All right? Now, I love SEC football. I just think the argument's dumb, right? Like, I get the whole SEC chant, but I can't believe a single Mississippi State fan went out and bought a 2015 Alabama National Championship shirt because of, SEC pride. I don't think that happened. Like, I don't think if you were a fan of Vanderbilt men's basketball when Kentucky was trying to go undefeated last year, you just went out and bought a whole bunch of Kentucky gear. All right, it's a dumb debate. All right, but it's also at times a necessary one. Because when you look at schedules, most of the teams you're going to play are in your own conference. Most of the ways we're going to evaluate your overall strength is from the teams on your schedule, and most of those teams come from your own league. So while I think the whole debate is dumb in terms of its provincial pride, it's a nothing burger. It is still a necessary evaluation aspect, especially when we're picking teams that go to the playoffs. And, we already went over the whole controversy on last week's episode between selecting Alabama over Ohio State, but there's another factor here. The last 2 years in the Big Ten, or the last 2 years in the college football playoffs, the Big Ten did not score a point. Michigan State, Ohio State, nothing. Zip, zilch, nada. And when you look at how heavily the 2016 college football playoff rankings favored the Big Ten, often 4. By the time we got later on in the year, you had Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Wisconsin, all regularly in the top 10. And then it laid an egg in the bowl season. I think this bowl season, in terms of changing the perception of the Big Ten, is going to mean an awful lot going into 2018, where you have Wisconsin has a lot coming back. You have Michigan with a lot coming back. Michigan State with a lot coming back. Penn State loses some key players, but still has a playmaking quarterback coming back. Ohio State always has a lot of talent coming back. So this is a league that's going to have several bona fide playoff contenders. Perception of the league, how we can change it, improve it during the offseason, I think could very well matter. And that's why I want to look at these Big Ten bowl games holistically rather than just singularly analyzing and previewing Michigan's game, which of course we will get to during the course of this rundown. Let's begin looking at the Big Ten bowls. Let's start in the Pinstripe Bowl. I'm going to predict, even though I like Iowa as the superior team, and these two teams are really mirror images of one another. Very similar styles. Boston College, I think, is just a less talented version of Iowa. But it's like Iowa's not in a bowl game. They've sold about as many tickets to this bowl game as South Florida has sold for the Birmingham Bowl. I mean, the legendary traveling legions of black and gold bumblebees that have gotten Iowa prime bowl dates in the past, just not interested in an expensive Christmas trip to Gotham City over the holidays. So I think this comes down to the excitement factor. I know Boston College is without its starting quarterback, but the backup, Wade, has a lot of experience. In fact, he started the year as the starting quarterback. I predict a somewhat ugly slugfest of a game. Iowa has struggled in bowl games in recent years. I just don't sense an excitement factor for the Hawkeyes at all. I think Boston College, when you start off, 0-4, 0-5, and you finish bowl eligible, I think they're a lot more excited to be in this game. So I think Boston College with a slight upset here over the University of Iowa, 20-17. Next, this I think is the worst matchup for the Big Ten in the bowl season. That's the Foster Farms Bowl. Khalil Tate just has been an unstoppable force since he burst onto the scene midseason and essentially saved Rich Rodriguez's job at Arizona. I don't like Purdue's defense, the ability of Purdue's defense to rein him in. I think that they're going to be chasing a ghost all day long. We have seen in Rich Rodriguez's career, when he has this kind of quarterback, he is a heck of a football coach. And when he doesn't, he's not a very good football coach. Well, right now, he does have this kind of quarterback. I think this is a springboard game for Arizona, which I think could very well be one of the favorites in the Pac-12 South next season. And I think Khalil Tate's just too much for Purdue. I think it's the toughest matchup any Big Ten team got in the bowl season. I like Arizona to actually win this one by more than a touchdown. We go next to the Holiday Bowl. Now, I like this matchup for Michigan State. I think, in general, whenever the better defensive team is getting points, you take them. That's clearly Sparty. I think when you look at Washington State, you have to wonder where they're at motivationally. They were just in this exact bowl game a year ago, and they laid an egg against Minnesota. Second year in a row, they thought they were playing for a bid in the Pac-12 championship in the Apple Cup, and then just got their doors blown off by their rivals at the University of Washington. This is a big rebound season for Michigan State. For For Washington State, several of their key players moving on, including the record-setting quarterback. But for Michigan State, this is a springboard game. This is a chance for them to maybe be a preseason top 10, top 15 team when we open up with the preseason polls in August. And I think they use this as a springboard and go out there to San Diego and get a nice win here for the Big Ten. I like Michigan State in a mild upset, 28-24. In the Music City Bowl, Northwestern, a touchdown and a hook, 7.5, touchdown and a hook favorite here over Kentucky. I mean, this is very close to Lexington, obviously. Kentucky will have the majority of fans there. Northwestern actually doesn't even have a lot of fans. So this will feel like a home game for the Kentucky style of Wildcats. But I do like the fact Northwestern is the stronger defensive club. I think when you look at Clayton Thorson and Justin Jackson and what they present in the offensive backfield from a playmaking standpoint, I think that's pretty even with the Kentucky offense that at times this year has actually been fairly explosive. And then at other times on defense, though, they have just not stopped absolutely anybody. Now, I don't think Northwestern covers that big of a line because they don't typically cover big lines in neutral site games like this. But I do think in the end, they wear down Kentucky's beleaguered run defense. Justin Jackson has a nice day to close out his Northwestern career, and the Wildcats of Northwestern beat the Wildcats of Kentucky 24-21. Now to the Cotton Bowl, which I think is one of the toughest bowl games to forecast this postseason. Now, a year ago, I correctly predicted Michigan was in trouble against Florida State. In fact, I picked the Seminoles to win the game. They were about a 6.5-point underdog, as USC is in this game. Why? Because Michigan had all the earmarkings of the classic team that lays an egg in the postseason. They got their dreams crushed at the very end. A lot of experienced players planning on moving on to the NFL draft. Guys already looking ahead at signing agents and everything else. And the first half, Michigan just frankly didn't look like they wanted to be on the field. Now, the second half, they played great. Even came back and took a late lead with some heroics from Chris Evans and Wilton Spate, but then gave up the ghost at the very end and lost that game in a heartbreaking fashion. And I'm worried about that with Ohio State here. Several of their players already moving on to the NFL draft or moving on early to the NFL draft. And USC, I think it's still about 50-50 that Sam Darnold may decide to return. I think there's a better chance of that than a lot of people are believing. And if he does, with the rest of the roster USC has returning, they're probably the preseason favorite in the Pac-12 next year. You have to also consider when you have a big-name program like USC, and this was true of Florida State last year when we had them in the Orange Bowl, when you're being told for several weeks you're not that good, you don't belong, you're going to get beat, you're an underdog. When you're a program of that kind of brand, like a Florida State for us a year ago or a USC, this year for Ohio State, that's a huge motivational advantage in terms of a chip on the shoulder. So Ohio State is the superior team athletically. They're just as athletic on the outside as USC, but in the trenches they are far superior. If they are motivated to play, they should win this game and probably right around the spread, if not a little bit more. But if they're even the slightest unmotivated and you go into a gunslinger environment, indoors, fast track at the Jerry World Dome against Sam Darnold looking to make a statement in a showcase game, this is the bowl game the Big Ten can probably least afford to lose from a perception standpoint, because of course, its big argument is it's undisputed champion. Ohio State got jobbed by not getting in the playoff. Well, if they go out there and lose the Cotton Bowl, what's that say about the league going into the offseason narrative? I'm going to predict Ohio State to win. Urban Meyer's record when he has more than a week to prepare is spectacular. Now, he had more than a week to prepare for the playoff game against Clemson last year, too, and he got shut out. I just think the odds of that happening twice in a row are low. So I will take Ohio State, but it would not shock me at all if the Trojans pulled the upset here. We go next to the Fiesta Bowl. And I think this is one of the more favorable matchups for the Big Ten. Penn State against Washington. Now, Washington this is rare. This is kind of the reverse of the old Big Ten Pac-10 Rose Bowls we used to watch in the 80s when the higher ranked Big Ten team would go out there and lose, right? And the reason we would lose is we were the team more stout in the trenches. They were too fast, too much speed on the outside. And in the end, they turned it into a track meet, and we couldn't keep up. This is kind of the reverse of that. Penn State is not overly strong in the trenches. I mean, they're good, but they're not your typical dominant Big Ten team up front. They're actually the more athletic team in this matchup. Washington is the more stout team in the trenches. Greg Gaines and Vita Vea, for example, on the defensive front. But here's the thing. Those guys are more of your gap plugger types. Meaning, if Michigan was playing Washington and they wanted a power running game, that'd be a tough matchup for Michigan. But Penn State's going to spread you out. And, Greg Gaines and Vita Vea are not your Warren Sapp, Maurice Hurst style of defensive tackles where they're splitting gaps and getting up the seam. And with how quickly Penn State gets rid of the football, the speed, athletic advantage I think they have with their skill position players against Washington's secondary and back seven players, I like Penn State in this game. I think this is a very favorable matchup. I'll give a nod to Chris Peterson, whose bowl prep record is pretty darn good going back to his Boise State days, that this game is still relatively close. But I think Penn State, this is as good of a matchup for the Big Ten as Purdue and Arizona is bad. I like the Nittany Lions here to win a somewhat high-scoring game. They get to the low 30s and win the Fiesta Bowl, which I think is a nice win for the Big Ten Conference. And now we have the Orange Bowl. I don't like this matchup at all. You have a Wisconsin team whose quarterback is turnover-prone, playing against the leading team in terms of forcing turnovers in college football this season, Alex Hornibrook, who is a walking turnover against the turnover chain. You also have to wonder about Wisconsin's motivation. Again, they had their heart broken at the very end. They kind of did the whole New Year's Six bowl game last year. This year they go 12-0. They're in the Big Ten championship game. It was about getting over the hump of losing a Big Ten championship game after blowing that huge lead against Penn State in 2016, and they couldn't get it done. So where are they at motivationally? Miami comes back home with a very young team. Most of these guys back next year. We have seen Miami this year when they are in that stadium under the lights prime time. They're just damn near unbeatable. I mean, that's a different football team than when they play in virtually any other environment. I think they're the hungrier team, given how disappointing their last two games were. They get some key injured guys back with the long layoff. They play a turnover-plagued quarterback. I like Miami here in a relatively low-scoring game to beat the Big Ten representative in Wisconsin and get themselves launched to what could be a pretty big 2018 for the Hurricanes, especially with the top-flight recruiting class that they have coming in. And that brings us to the Outback Bowl. I love this matchup for Michigan. You have a South Carolina offense. Jake Bentley can run, but he can run in the way Wilton Spate and Brandon Peters can run. I mean, he's not a statue back there. He would just prefer, he's like Bartleby the Scrivener. He would prefer not to. Little literary reference for you here this Christmas. He'd prefer to stand back there and throw from the pocket. Well, if you're going up against a Don Brown defense and that's your style, usually that's not a good day for you. Also, you have to wonder about the South Carolina offense. Changing coordinators, where are they at right now? Who's calling the plays? What system are they going to run? They're sort of in some disarray there. Since Deebo Samuel went out, who is, I think, a future pro. He went out about a third of the way through the season. The big playability of the South Carolina offense has been diminished greatly. It's one of the reasons why I believe they've been outgained as a team this season, despite their 8-4 record. So when I look at this matchup, I think the matchup is very favorable for the Wolverines because South Carolina plays the kind of offense that Don Brown's defense usually does the most dominant job against. I also think you're going to see Brandon Peters play his off. I think coming back, not playing against Ohio State, coming out of the concussion protocol, and then hearing for a month, Shay Patterson's taken your job. They brought in somebody else to beat you out. I've got to believe if he's any kind of competitor at all, and we saw against Wisconsin, that he is a competitor. I think that you're going to see him play some really good football on New Year's Day. It's a prime slot for the Wolverines. They're the lead-in game to the college football playoff on New Year's Day, the only Big Ten team playing that day. They're going to have huge ratings for that game. It's a showcase event. Both teams will bring a lot of fans. They both travel well. But I think this is a game where Michigan uses this as a launching pad for 2018, just as they used the Citrus Bowl 2 years ago as a launching pad into 2016. So I think when you throw in the motivational factor of Brandon Peters knowing this is his real shot to put a stranglehold on this job before Shay Patterson gets on campus and starts challenging him in offseason conditioning going into spring football, and then you look at the matchup of South Carolina's offensive style going against Don Brown, and this is what he typically does the best, I think the Wolverines will win this game and will cover the 7.5 to 8 point spread here, win it by about 10 points, maybe even a little bit more. I love this matchup for the Wolverines. If you love what we've been doing here at Michigan Podcast for the last 6 months, one of the ways you can help us is to support our efforts here via Patreon. Patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. And as you can see, even though football season is over, we're still doing instant reaction basketball podcasts. I'll put another one up here coming out of the non-conference season when that gets wrapped up before we head into Big Ten play against Iowa in early January. And throughout the course of the year, we'll put other little bonuses up here as well to say thank you to those of you that are supporting our efforts. And, you know, if we get to a certain level of support, then that will justify the expense of maybe producing more long-form content here in places like YouTube with the graphics, the visuals, and everything else you guys like so much that make this look like a very professional presentation. Well, that stuff isn't free, and so we appreciate your support if you like what we're doing here. Patreon.com/Michigan Podcast, and thank you to all of you that have been supporting us all this time as well. Back here on Michigan Podcast, and now that we have taken a look and previewed and predicted what we think will be the outcome of Big Ten Bowl season, and by the way, for a little bonus in the college football playoff bowl games, I like Oklahoma and Alabama to win. I like Oklahoma and Alabama to win and then face off for the national championship. And that will be the first real major sporting event of 2018, even though it's the wrap-up to the 2017 season. So I thought, let's gaze into the crystal ball. Let's take a look at what could very well be, in my view, the top 10 sports stories for the Michigan Wolverines in the coming year. Number 1, I think Michigan, as I just predicted, will beat South Carolina in the Outback Bowl and use that as a springboard for 2018. And Harbaugh, if I'm right, will be 29-10 in his first 3 years at Michigan. Given where this program was, folks, we were giving away tickets if you bought a Coke Zero. There were literally riots on campus to get rid of the AD. ESPN was accusing us of being negligent when it came to player safety. We had averaged barely 7 wins for the previous decade. We were a joke compared to where we were. To be 29-10 in Harbaugh's first 3 years, and when you look at the team we have coming back next year, I think when he was announced as our coach on December 30th, 2014, if we would have been told that would be our record in the first 3 years, I think every one of you that's a Michigan fan watching us right now would take that. So yes, there are times that there are legit criticisms. I've had criticisms on this show. This was a disappointing season. Harbaugh said at the bust back in early December, this was a disappointing season. It's still an 8-4 season. If disappointment at Michigan now is 8-4, I'll take that. I'll take that. Next prediction. I think Shay Patterson will be made immediately eligible. One of the things the NCAA is doing now is attempting to stay out of court at all costs. Why? Because they keep losing. They keep losing. So one way to stay out of court is just to let Ole Miss, the players that have transferred there that are making the case, hey, we were recruited under false pretenses. The school told us there wasn't going to be a serious probation. You know, they lied to us. We should be made immediately eligible. We would have gone to school there if we would have known half of our eligibility that we wouldn't be eligible for the postseason. I think you'll see the NCAA grant them that cert to avoid facing a real cert in a court of law. And I think Shay Patterson will be immediately eligible by the time we get to spring football. And boy, what a battle at quarterback, if I'm right, that will be. I've got a hunch Chase Winovich is going to return for his senior season. I think he's got a shot, like Moe Hurst did a year ago when he decided to take his 5th year And, Moe would have probably been a 3rd or 4th round draft pick, which is where I think Chase Winovich will likely be now. And Moe is definitely going to be a 1st round draft pick now, provided he remains healthy through the scouting process. I think Winovich has a chance to do that too. I mean, playing opposite Rashawn Gary, meaning you're going to face a lot of single blocking because they've got to double team the other side almost every single down. Doing that for 12 more games is a heck of a way to build a pro tape and to make yourself maybe a late 1st round, early 2nd round pick. And there's a huge difference in terms of money, job security, contract security between that and being a 3rd and 4th round pick. Number 4 on my predictions for 2018, I'm going to predict Michigan to finish 4th in the Big Ten in men's basketball. I think Michigan State is just way ahead of everybody else in the league. I think Purdue is pretty good too. And then after that, I think there's several teams that could vie for 3rd through 12th, 13th maybe. I like our roster a lot. I think man 1 through 11, this might be the best roster John Beilein's had. Now, he can't put 5 guys on the court as good as the 5 he could put on the court in 2013 and 2014. But man 1 through 11, the depth, we actually have a 2 deep at Michigan basketball. We haven't had that a lot over the years. And so I think when you're looking at a very balanced league where there's going to be a lot of games that are toss-ups and coin flips every night, that kind of depth will come in handy, and I think it will help Michigan finish in the top 4 in Big Ten men's basketball when it's all said and done. Number 5, I'm going to predict Brandon Peters has the best spring football performance by a Michigan quarterback since Denard Robinson in the spring of 2010, when he just lit it up and announced that this was a totally different football team than the one you were accustomed to before. And we were going to finally see Rich Rod's offense, and boy, howdy, did we see that, right? Unfortunately, we also saw Rich Rod's defense. But the offense was fun in those days. But I think you're going to see Brandon Peters light it up throughout the course of the spring. I don't think he is content to just say, hey, Shay Patterson, you're right, man. We kept the seat warm for you. This is on you now. I don't think so at all. I mean, they were in the same recruiting class. They were both highly valued, highly coveted prospects. I think you're going to see Brandon Peters light it up throughout the course of the spring with a fire lit under him by the arrival of Shay. Number 6, I think Michigan men's basketball earns a number 7 seed in the NCAA tournament, but gets a tough draw and doesn't make it past the opening weekend. Now, I think next year's team, I think that's potentially, depending on what happens with Wagner and with Matthews. I doubt we get them both back. I bet you we get one. And the recruiting class we have coming in, I think is really, really good. The players we have coming back, I think next year's team is a definitive preseason top 15, top 20 team all year long. Big Ten challenger for John Beilein. I still think this year's team can be pretty good. It wouldn't shock me if they got back to the Sweet 16. I just think, given the low regard that the RPI has for the Big Ten, and we learned last year that the selection committee, I prefer Ken Palm's ratings. I think they're more accurate metric, but the committee doesn't. They like the RPI. I think you're going to see several Big Ten teams that finish well with good records in Big Ten play, like Michigan, if they finish 4th, are going to get tough opening week draws, though, and that will cost them some seeding and make it more difficult to get out of that opening weekend. Number 7, I think Maurice Hurst is the first Michigan defensive tackle now. We've had several defensive ends taken in the first round, including Taco Charlton last year, but we have not had a lot of defensive tackles taken in the first round of the NFL draft. In fact, I went back and looked it up. 1974. I was 1 year old. 1974 is the last time a pure defensive tackle at Michigan was picked in the first round of the NFL draft. Can you believe that? Wow. That stat absolutely blew me away. We've had so many very good defensive ends, but most of our defensive tackles have kind of been, role player types, plugger types, and when we did have a dominant defensive tackle like an Alan Branch, who's still in the NFL, but he wasn't a first round draft pick. So I think Moe Hurst ends the streak that we've had since Dave Gallagher was picked in the first round of the 1974 draft by the Chicago Bears 43 years ago. Number 8, I'm going to predict Michigan football is 7-0 heading into East Lansing to take on Sparty. You look at Michigan's schedule, it's Wisconsin, bye week, Sparty. I think Michigan will be 7-0, and yes, that does mean I think we will open the season by beating Notre Dame in South Bend. When I look at what Notre Dame is losing, I think we will be the superior personnel team. And I think we'll finally have an answer at quarterback and win that game in the temporary, anyway, renewal of that rivalry. So I think we'll be 7-0 when we visit Spartan Stadium mid-season next year. And boy, can you imagine the atmosphere for that game? Because when you look at Michigan State's schedule, I'm not sure they're any worse than 1 or 2 losses, if even that themselves. That could be a college game day affair, no question about it. One of the bigger Michigan State games in recent memory. Number 9. I guess you know what I think is going to happen in the Sparty game. I'm going to predict the Wolverines are 11-0 heading into Columbus to take on Ohio State. Steve, you're nuts. You're crazy. We didn't beat any teams with a winning record this year. Georgia was 7-5. Only got to 8-5 because they won the Liberty Bowl. They're heading to the playoff. This happens every year. Teams take big leaps every year. Penn State was 7-5 in 2015, won the Big Ten the very next year. Teams take leaps all the time. I think Michigan will take one as well. We'll be 7-0 heading into Sparty, 11-0 heading into Columbus. Which leads me to my final prediction. Finally, Michigan will make it to Indianapolis for the Big Ten championship game for the very first time. It's hard to believe. We've never played in that game. I believe the drought ends 11 months from now. What do you think about those 10 predictions? Let us know on Twitter at Michigan Podcast. This week's episode of Michigan Podcast is brought to you by The Athletic, one of the emerging powers in sports media commentary. There's a look at their website. Fantastic premium sports analysis from some of the biggest writers in the industry. And you can find them at The Athletic. And right now, if you want to get introduced to the outstanding work they do at The Athletic, this is the right time. 20% off a subscription if you go to theathletic.com/DSP for Detroit Sports Podcast, our partners here at Michigan Podcast. Theathletic.com/DSP. Subscribe from that link and get 20% off your subscription to The Athletic. Theathletic.com/DSP. And finally, this week, that brings us to this week's question of the week. Aaron asks, how good is the Michigan men's basketball team really? You know what I love about this team so far? The way they've won some big games, grinder games. The way they won at Texas, and yes, I know Texas' leading scorer wasn't there. They still are a team, though, in terms of the size and length they put on the floor that we've just struggled against historically in the John Beilein era. But the way we won that game, though, having to manufacture some points, having to hunker down and bear down on defense, that mirrors the way you're going to have to win a lot of games on the road in Big Ten play. And I love that. I love the fact that they beat UCLA in an up and down track meet, a lot of athletes on the floor, a lot of guys attacking the rim with open space in a huge comeback. And then the very next game, they go on the road to Texas and play a complete half-court, slobber knocker, rock fight. I love the fact they're winning games with diversities of styles. And they've got different guys this year. There's nobody as good and clutch as Derek Walton was. But there's several guys that when you need a play, when you need a bucket from Matthews to Wagner to Marr, that those guys can make some of those plays. So I love the diversity of the team in terms of their personnel. It's a totally different look when Teskey comes on the floor in place of Wagner. I love the fact they've already shown against some good competition they can win in diversity of ways. So, I don't think this is the best team John Beilein's had. I do think it might be the deepest. I think it's a team that has a pretty good ceiling. And I love, as I mentioned earlier in this week's podcast, I love the depth and even the injury to Wagner at the time that he got hurt. You don't want to see that for a guy as talented as him. But coming up against these three opponents that we're playing right now that we're going to overwhelm heading into Big Ten play, that gives Wagner a couple of weeks off, and it gives Austin Davis, another young up-and-coming big man that they're happy about and they're excited about. He gets some quality minutes. Teskey now, you get to test his conditioning, and he gets some more quality minutes other than just filling in for Wagner when he gets that one silly foul in the first half of every key game. I really like this team. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Now, I don't think it's a team that can win the Big Ten because I do think Michigan State's talent level is just far too superior. I don't think it's a team that can get to a Final Four, but I do think it's a team, if you look especially what's coming in with next year's recruiting class, which I think is top flight, I think it's going to be a fun season that gives you a preview of what could potentially be a championship season one season from now. Thank you to all of you that have watched the first 6 months of our episodes here at Michigan Podcast. We are looking forward to another exciting 2018. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Michigan Podcast. We love to communicate with you that way as well. Subscribe to our channel here on YouTube. Please comment, like us here, and like us and comment and give us positive reviews both here and iTunes. It does really help us get the word out. So if you like what we're doing here, please help us to spread the word about Michigan Podcast. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. Go Blue. We'll see you again January 9th.